The day was heavy with heat and memories as Lena stepped out of her car, taking in the sight of her grandmother's old home nestled in a quiet corner of rural Georgia. June Carter's passing had left a hole in the family, a void wrapped in stories and memories that most didn't know or care to speak of. The house, a quiet relic of a forgotten era, seemed to mourn her too, with its shuttered windows and the slow creak of the front porch as Lena climbed the steps. Inside, the air was thick and still, carrying a faint scent of lavender and something more elusive, like old books and rain-soaked earth. She walked through the rooms, glancing over familiar mementos. Family photos with yellowed edges, June's framed certificates from community meetings, and a stack of well-thumbed civil rights magazines on the table. A wave of nostalgia pulled her back to the summers spent here as a little girl, learning to cook in the cramped kitchen, listening to June's stories as the sun set behind the fields. But today, there were no stories, no voice to carry them. It was just Lena and the weight of her grandmother's absence. After the short ceremony with family and a handful of friends, she lingered, knowing the house was now her responsibility. She hadn't come just to say goodbye. She was here to understand, to find something she had missed in June's life that no one had ever spoken of. As she moved upstairs, she found herself drawn to the attic. She hesitated before tugging on the old pull chain, causing a faint cloud of dust to billow down. The narrow staircase seemed to whisper secrets with each step, leading her into a space that had remained untouched for years. Boxes and crates lined the walls, each marked with neat, handwritten labels. But what caught her eye was a leather suitcase tucked away in the corner, half buried under old quilts and pillows. Lena reached for it, her fingers brushing the cool leather, the faded initials JC faintly visible on its surface. She opened the clasps, and with a hesitant breath, lifted the lid. Inside lay an assortment of papers, yellowed and frayed at the edges, photographs, and a bundle of letters tied together with a thin, worn ribbon. Each item held a sense of weight and history, secrets waiting to be uncovered. Her gaze fell on a photograph of June, much younger, standing alongside a group of people. They were in front of a modest building with a For Freedom banner stretched above them. The date on the back read 1965, the year Lena's grandmother had moved back to this very house. She turned the photo over and found a scrawled message. To June, with love and hope, JT. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know anyone by the initials JT, and it made her wonder, who was he? And what did he mean to her grandmother? Curiosity flared within her as she stared at the suitcase, realizing she'd stumbled upon a mystery she couldn't ignore. The dim light in the attic cast long shadows as Lena sifted through the suitcase, her curiosity building. She untied the bundle of letters and unfolded the first one. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, the words inked in a style that spoke of urgency and purpose. Dearest June, it began. The time for change is upon us. I hope this letter reaches you safely. Our work is dangerous, and there are those who would stop us if they could. But remember, our struggle is not just ours. It is for those who come after, for the voices not yet heard. Yours, JT. Lena felt a shiver run through her as she read. She knew her grandmother had lived through turbulent times, but this was a side of June she'd never known. The stories June told her growing up were always gentle, filled with lessons on kindness and resilience. But here, in this letter, was a voice of strength and resolve, a voice willing to sacrifice for something greater. She picked up another letter, this one shorter, almost like a note, hastily scribbled and slightly smudged. June, I worry that someone close to us may betray our efforts. Be careful. Trust no one fully, not even those who claim to be allies. If anything happens to me, keep the letters safe. Lena's mind spun with questions. What was this betrayal JT had warned about? And why hadn't June ever spoken of it? She remembered the photograph from earlier. the young woman with defiance in her eyes, standing in front of that banner. This was a side of her grandmother she hadn't known, a story woven deep into the fabric of their family that no one had dared unravel. Placing the letters back carefully, Lena closed the suitcase and sat back on her heels, her mind buzzing. She had come to clean up the house, to say goodbye to the last living connection to her childhood summers. Instead, she had stumbled upon a mystery that would change the way she saw her grandmother, and maybe even herself. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she was certain of one thing. She couldn't leave until she uncovered the truth. As she descended the attic stairs, suitcase in hand, Lena felt a newfound sense of purpose and connection. She was no longer just a granddaughter paying her respects. She was the keeper of her family's secrets, the one entrusted to piece together a hidden legacy. Lena couldn't stop thinking about the letters as she moved through the house, the suitcase weighing heavily in her hand. She set it down on the dining table and carefully arranged the letters and photographs before her, each piece forming a puzzle with edges that didn't quite fit together yet. One photograph caught her eye. June, arm in arm with a small group of young people, standing in front of a bus. They looked like they'd been through something intense, their faces alight with determination. In the corner, someone had scribbled, "Freedom Ride 64. Lena felt a rush of pride and shock. Her grandmother had been a freedom rider? She'd read about them in school. Young people risking everything to challenge segregation laws in the South, riding buses through hostile towns, enduring violent resistance, and standing firm for justice. As Lena traced her grandmother's face in the photograph, a memory stirred. She remembered being 7 or 8, sitting on June's lap as her grandmother hummed softly, her fingers running through Lena's hair. June had always been strong, but gentle, a woman who baked cookies, offered advice, and always had time for a story. She'd never spoken of anything like this, of the activism and courage it would have taken to board that bus. It was then that Lena noticed a folded note tucked into the corner of the suitcase.
Unfolding it, she found a list of names, some crossed out, and beside each name was a small symbol. A star, a heart, or a cross. Lena recognized one of the names immediately. JT. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She realized that each name must have belonged to a member of the movement, those who had fought alongside her grandmother. And those crossed-out names, were they people who had not made it? The more she examined the suitcase's contents, the more she felt the weight of her grandmother's life pressing down on her. There was so much she hadn't known, so much that had been left unspoken. But she couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't just relics of the past. They were clues, perhaps even warnings, meant to be uncovered now by her. As she refolded the note, a gust of wind rattled the window panes, making her jump. The house felt different now, filled with ghosts of a history she hadn't realized she'd inherited. She'd come here to remember her grandmother, but now, it seemed, she was being drawn into a mission that went far beyond family remembrance. It was as though her grandmother were guiding her hand, urging her to keep searching, to bring to light what had been hidden in the shadows for so long. Lena looked around the empty house, as if June herself might appear in the doorway with a knowing smile, ready to tell her everything. She took a steadying breath and placed the note back inside the suitcase. Whatever secrets her grandmother had kept, they were hers to uncover now. The suitcase seemed almost to hum with the weight of its secrets, each piece begging to be understood. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that, in some way, she had been meant to find this, that June had wanted her to. And, she realized with a new certainty, she wouldn't leave until she had uncovered every piece of this hidden life. The following day, Lena returned to the suitcase, her fingers brushing over the pile of letters tied with a faded ribbon. JT's letters, her mind whispered, like an echo. Who was this man who had written so many words to her grandmother? And what had brought them so close? She carefully untied the ribbon, lifting the first letter and unfolding it. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the passion behind the words seemed to pulse off the page. June, it began. There is no place I would rather be than by your side. But this work we do is too important to let emotions cloud our purpose. You, my dearest, are a lioness, fierce and unyielding. And you make me believe that we can truly change the world. Lena's fingers trembled as she read. The words were intimate, filled with admiration and longing. She could sense the connection between her grandmother and this JT, whoever he was. This wasn't just a friend or a fellow activist. This was something more. As she continued reading, she began to piece together a picture of JT, a man whose heart was in the fight for justice, who saw the world as a place that could be reshaped by courage and conviction. But there was also a hint of something darker, an awareness of the danger they faced. His words hinted at shadows, of betrayals from within, of threats from without. I fear that not everyone around us can be trusted, June. Another letter read. There are whispers of informants, of those who would see us fail, who would sell us out for the price of peace with the oppressors. Be cautious, my love, for you walk among snakes. Lena felt her breath catch as she read. It wasn't just the poetic tone that struck her, it was the reality, the weight of the danger that her grandmother had walked into willingly, knowing the risks. And the reference to informants unsettled her. Had her grandmother known people who were betrayed? People who had been hurt, or worse, by those they trusted? She sifted through more letters, some longer, some only quick notes. Each seemed to reveal a piece of JT's character and the deep bond he shared with her grandmother. But one letter in particular made her pause. It was dated just days before the famous March of 1965. JT wrote, June, if we do not make it out, if the unthinkable happens, know that my heart has always been yours. Our dreams have set fire to these chains, and though we may fall, others will rise to carry our flame. The letter ended abruptly, as though he hadn't had time to finish. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She'd never known this side of her grandmother's life, a world of secrecy, of love born out of shared struggle, of danger lurking around every corner. What had happened to JT? And why had June kept these letters, hidden and untouched? Questions whirled in her mind as she retied the letters, placing them carefully back into the suitcase. Her grandmother's hidden life was opening up before her, a world she had only just begun to glimpse. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stop now. There was too much at stake, and too many mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. Lena spent hours that day, absorbed in JT's letters, feeling the raw emotions captured in each line. She couldn't help but wonder about the man himself, his convictions, his courage, and most of all, his love for her grandmother. Had he been a part of her family's life in ways she never knew? Her fingers brushed against another letter, one shorter than the others, marked with urgency. June, the meetings are becoming more dangerous. The sheriff's office is watching us. Be careful what you say, especially around those who linger but never speak up. Lena's mind turned over the possibilities. Who had they been hiding from? And who were the people JT warned about, the ones who never spoke up? Each piece of the story seemed to deepen the mystery, like the quilt patterns her grandmother used to make, intricate and winding. That evening, as she read by the dim light of the old dining room lamp, Lena discovered something else tucked between the letters, a postcard. It was worn, its corners frayed, but the image of a bustling street scene in Washington, D.C., was still clear. Turning it over, Lena saw the briefest of notes. For the dream, we march. The date was marked, just one day before the famous March on Washington in 1963. Her heart skipped a beat. She realized that her grandmother and JT must have been there, standing alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as he delivered his unforgettable speech. Lena could almost see them, hand in hand, their voices rising with the crowd. Her grandmother had lived through history, and she had been an active part of it, a thread woven into the fight for justice and equality. For the first time, Lena felt her grandmother's legacy as her own. She was no longer just a young woman cleaning out an old house. She was a descendant of changemakers, people who had fought for a better world.
But even as pride filled her, she was haunted by questions. Why had June kept this part of her life hidden? And what had happened to JT? Determined, she placed the postcard back in the suitcase, promising herself that she would follow this path wherever it led. Her grandmother's story wasn't just a memory. It was a mystery, one Lena was compelled to solve. The following morning, Lena returned to the house with fresh resolve. She wandered through each room, hoping for any clues that might lead her further into her grandmother's past. As she stood in the small, cozy parlor, her eyes fell on an old family portrait she hadn't noticed before. June was there, standing tall and proud, but beside her was a young man with intense eyes and a slightly mischievous smile. Lena's pulse quickened. Was this JT? Before she could linger, she noticed a faint seam in the wall behind the portrait, something her grandmother's careful eye would never have overlooked. Heart pounding, Lena pushed against the wall. To her amazement, a small panel swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a slim leather-bound journal, faded but intact. She opened it gingerly, her eyes scanning the first page. Property of June Carter, for my eyes only. A thrill ran through her as she realized she was holding her grandmother's private journal. Turning to the next page, Lena began to read June's words, written in a careful looping script. Today, JT and I discussed our plans for the march. He believes we can make a difference, and I know he's right. But I am worried. Rumors of betrayal are everywhere, and even the people we trust most are growing wary. I've kept our circle small, but how much longer can we hold out? The words were laced with anxiety, hinting at a time when trust had been a luxury, and betrayal a constant threat. June's entries continued, detailing secret meetings, the fear of police surveillance, and her growing love for JT. Their relationship was forged in the fires of activism, and Lena could feel her grandmother's emotions bleeding through each page. She turned another page, and her heart froze. There, scrawled hastily in the margins, was a line that sent chills down her spine. If anything happens to me, Lena, remember what we fought for. Our legacy is yours to protect. Lena's mind raced. How had June known she would find this? Had she been speaking directly to her granddaughter, across time? A part of Lena wanted to believe it was fate, that she had been meant to uncover these secrets, to learn from them, and to carry them forward. She closed the journal gently, placing it back in its hidden compartment. With every revelation, she felt her connection to her grandmother deepen. But she also felt the weight of her family's history, a history she hadn't fully understood until now. The suitcase, the letters, the journal, they were all pieces of a story she was only just beginning to uncover. Lena was restless that night. She lay awake, the journal's words echoing in her mind. June's warnings about betrayal seemed all too real now, her voice haunting Lena in the silence of the old house. Why had her grandmother been so afraid? And who had she feared? Unable to sleep, Lena found herself drawn to the attic once more. She flicked on the light and scanned the room, her gaze falling on an old filing cabinet tucked away in the corner. It seemed out of place among the dusty boxes and knickknacks. With a sense of foreboding, she pulled open the top drawer. Inside, she found a series of folders, each labeled with a single name. As she thumbed through them, a chill ran down her spine. They were all names from the list she had found in the suitcase, including JT's. The folders contained notes and newspaper clippings, documenting the lives and, in some cases, the deaths of people who had been part of June's world. But one folder stood out, marked with the name Thomas Jameson. She opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside was a letter addressed to her grandmother. The letter was signed by someone named MT, and it accused June of placing faith in the wrong people. The tone was cold, almost hostile, and it hinted at a betrayal Lena couldn't quite piece together. She looked through the rest of the folder, finding a single newspaper clipping that made her blood run cold. It was an obituary for Thomas Jameson, dated just 2 weeks after one of JT's last letters to June. Lena's mind raced. Had JT been betrayed? And had her grandmother known who was responsible? Questions flooded her thoughts, filling her with a mix of anger and sorrow. JT had been more than a friend to her grandmother. He had been her partner in life and in struggle, someone she had loved and trusted. And now, Lena was left to pick up the pieces of a tragedy she barely understood. She placed the folder back in the drawer, closing it carefully. The shadows of the past seemed to swirl around her, each revelation pulling her deeper into her grandmother's story. But Lena was no longer afraid. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how dark or painful it might be. For the first time, she felt a sense of clarity. Her grandmother's fight was now hers, and she would see it through to the end. The following day, Lena woke up determined. She could almost feel her grandmother's presence guiding her forward. There was more in the house waiting to be discovered, and Lena's curiosity was now mixed with a sense of duty. She returned to the attic, where sunlight streamed through a small window, casting a warm glow on the dust-covered relics. As she moved toward the wall, she noticed faint scratch marks, almost like someone had carved words there with shaky hands. Leaning closer, Lena saw the faint outlines of what seemed like a message. It read, "Never forget the cost of silence." Lena ran her fingers over the words, the meaning sinking in deeply. Had her grandmother carved this as a reminder to herself? Or was it a warning meant for anyone who came after her? Either way, Lena understood the weight behind those words. June had seen the cost of silence firsthand, of friends lost and battles fought in the dark, all because of secrets and betrayals. Stepping back, Lena let her gaze fall across the room. Her eyes landed on a small locked chest she hadn't noticed before, half hidden beneath a pile of old quilts. She dragged it out, her fingers brushing over the intricate carvings on its lid. The lock was rusty, but with a bit of determination, Lena managed to pry it open. Inside, she found a small bundle wrapped in cloth. As she carefully unwrapped it, she discovered a piece of jewelry, a delicate silver pendant with a tiny engraving of a flame on it. Attached was a note in her grandmother's handwriting, to keep the fire burning, even in the darkest times. The pendant felt warm in her hand, as though her grandmother's courage had been poured into it. She slipped it over her head, feeling an unexpected sense of strength. Her grandmother hadn't just left her a mystery. She'd left her a reminder of the courage it took to stand against the odds. Lena's heart pounded as she realized that the more she uncovered, the closer she felt to her grandmother. But with each discovery, she also sensed an unfinished mission, one that had been passed down to her like a torch. She vowed to keep searching, to find the truth her grandmother had hidden away for so many years. Days passed, and Lena devoted every spare moment to piecing together her grandmother's story. She scoured the house, uncovering more letters and photographs, each revealing more about June's life as an activist. One afternoon, as she sat at the kitchen table, she found herself holding a letter dated July 1964. It was from JT, and the words struck Lena with their poignancy. "June, the heartland trembles, but we must stand firm. They try to divide us, to drive us apart with fear. But our love, our bond, is stronger than any weapon they wield." The letter went on to describe a journey JT had taken across the South, meeting with activists and organizing rallies. He painted vivid scenes of fields stretching out beneath blazing skies, of marches through towns where faces peered from behind closed curtains, of whispered conversations in dimly lit rooms. Lena could feel the world JT had inhabited, one of courage and peril. She could picture him and her grandmother, united by a shared purpose, pushing forward despite the threats looming around every corner. And it struck her that, for all the hardships they had faced, they had never wavered. As she read, Lena felt a growing connection to JT, as though he were reaching out to her across the years. His words weren't just for June, they were for anyone willing to listen, to carry on the legacy of change. Lena made a silent promise to honor that legacy, to keep the fire alive, just as her grandmother had. With each letter, she felt her understanding of June deepen. Her grandmother had been a fighter, someone who had sacrificed so much for what she believed in. And now, Lena felt that same fire stirring within her, a desire to do more than just remember. One evening, while searching the library shelves, Lena discovered a notebook filled with meeting notes. These weren't the sentimental, personal letters she'd been reading. Instead, they were meticulous records of strategy, plans, and even a few names Lena didn't recognize. One name, however, caught her attention: MT. The initials matched the hostile letter she'd found in the drawer about Thomas Jameson, but there was no explanation of who MT was or why he'd threatened her grandmother. Lena's curiosity grew. She felt that this MT was a key figure in her grandmother's life, possibly someone who'd been both a friend and a foe. She flipped through the notebook, finding references to meetings held in various cities and notes on speeches they'd given. But among these ordinary entries, she found something surprising: mentions of an ally within the local government, someone who'd provided inside information to their group. Lena's mind raced. Could this ally have been MT? And if so, what had caused him to turn on her grandmother? Had he betrayed them, or was he still acting as a double agent? The mystery deepened with every word, and Lena's determination to uncover the truth grew stronger. She knew that the past wasn't as simple as it seemed, that alliances could shift in the blink of an eye. But she also knew that her grandmother had never been one to give up easily. If June had held her ground despite the odds, then so would she. Closing the notebook, Lena placed it back on the shelf. Her next step was clear. She would need to dig deeper, to find out who MT was and why he'd been so entwined in her grandmother's life. The answers were here, somewhere in this house, and Lena was more determined than ever to find them.